powers must act together, because if we're not at the table, we're on the menu.
Somewhere Europe has to grow out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are not Europe's problems.
चुन चुन करके हिसाब लेना ये मेरी फितरत है.
Why should it be a problem if I'm smart enough to have multiple options? You should be admiring me.
भारत झुकने वाला भी नहीं.
The rise of India will be determined by India. It will be determined by our strength, not by the mistakes of others.
The old order is not coming back. We shouldn't mourn it. Nostalgia is not a strategy.
Once more into the fray, the last good fight I'll ever know. Live and die on this day. Live and die on this day. And that's the situation of India-US relations right now. It's always another fray, another day. And what we are going to talk about in this video today, we are going to talk about why India is not afraid of all these tariffs and sanctions threats anymore. Why is that? And before we move forward, guys, please do like and subscribe, because this is a small channel and it does need your help so that I can produce and bring better content. And the one promise I can make you is that my content is never gonna be about agenda or some internal politics or this and that. I always talk about the systemic changes, the changes that actually are occurring behind the scenes that nobody talks about. Okay, so please do like and subscribe. Let's get going, let's get started and find out why India is not afraid of all these tariff threats and sanctions threats of the America anymore. Okay, so let's get going, let's get started, let's talk about it. See, here's what's going on. Just recently, the US Senate has now passed a legislation 86-11 that could give President Donald Trump, authority to impose tariffs of up to 100% on goods from largest buyers of Russian oil and gas, putting India directly in the line of fire. And this is also called, let me look at it and I'll tell you, this is called Russia Sanctions Bill. Okay, and let me share my screen with you real quick. Okay, and then we'll move forward. So Russia's US Senate has passed. It has to go through the House too. Okay, US Senate passes sweeping Russia sanctions bill. The bipartisan legislation passed by the Senate in an 86-11 vote would penalize countries that continue to buy Russian oil, gas, and other exports. It would give President Trump the authority to impose tariffs up to 100%. Fair enough. Okay. All right. All right. We will see what's what and who's who. But the question really is that why is India unlikely to panic in this situation? The reason is that Washington is reaching, that is Donald Trump, United States, reaching a point where tariffs stop functioning as pressure and start becoming more like an economic separation. Meaning that when you are saying 5%, 10%, then you are only saying that, yeah, that's fine, fair enough, 10% tariff, okay, all right. We can work this out, guys, all right, it's gonna impact our business, is that. But the moment you go above 25%, in fact, even after 15%, actually, 25%, 50%, 100%, like that, then what happens is that you are basically saying that, hey, don't trade with us. Okay, that's exactly what happens. You're talking about the economic separation. All right, at 10%, 25%, even 50%, right? America can threaten India with losing competitiveness in the US market. And with high inflation, actually, certain products, nobody will care about the tariffs. Actually, people will just go and buy regardless. But at 100%, the threat effectively becomes like, okay, stop buying Russian energy, or we will make much of your trade with America commercially impossible. That's what US is basically giving the message with this type of activity. That, oh, we don't want to trade with you. Now, this is another way of saying, if you ask me how I am looking at it, then hmm, this is another way of US actually saying that, hey, grapes are sour. Why? Because India is just not signing the trade deal. The trade deal is not getting finalized, and I can tell you that it's not going to get finalized until Donald Trump is gone. Okay? That ego battle is just not going to work in India's space. That's the problem. All right, Donald Trump's things are not driven by strategy, or I would say, uh, or planning. It's mainly driven by ego, right? At this point, when actually what Donald Trump could have said or used it to his advantage by saying that, hey, we are going to sign 500 billion mission 500 deal with India. Yes, and you don't have to even talk about agriculture and all that. Leave it be, leave it alone. Okay, fair enough. We are uh, uh, just simply say, tell India that, hey, we respect all this, and we are not, no need for agriculture. Let's not worry about it. Let's go sign whatever we can work out, and let's sign all that, and let's move forward. That's all he had to do. That's all he had to do. But because of his ego, he has dragged this thing further. And American farmers are simply suffering. Why? Because of all these tariffs. Now, China is not buying soybean, China is not buying pearls, lentils, or anything. India has imposed almost 25 to 50% tariffs on American lentils, pearls, that we call dal, right? All that. And so all those farmers are suffering. And then coffee, there is a tariff imposed on coffee from Brazil and all that. So coffee, for Brazil found its coffee market in China and all that, or China. Okay, Brazil found its market, but coffee over here became what, expensive. Okay, and American farmers are also in return are not finding that market anymore. So Donald Trump could have actually sorted this out in a different way, but he didn't. He chose to use his ego to fight this battle. And he should understand that ego does not work with a man of patience. Somebody of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's stature, I mean, the guy is cool as cucumber, okay? You cannot just go and show ego and threat and this and that to that man and expect something done. If you don't believe me, go look at all his enemies that are gone, pecan, okay, that don't even exist anymore. Anyways, let's move forward. So, so India at this point, like when this threat of 100% tariff is made, then India is no longer deciding that Russian oil versus slightly higher US tariffs or something. India is deciding that, hey, should we choose strategic independence versus allowing United States to dictate whom India can trade with? And this is the stance. This is the stance that India has chosen all along. If you look into it, every time you go and listen to MEA briefing, right? MEA briefing, what they say? That India is free to choose who they want to trade with, who they are going to purchase, or who they are going to fulfill their energy requirements. Because what is cost effective to India is what India goes with. That's what MEA, Ministry of External Affairs, says, right? And that's exactly what it is. So, now actually, so increasing the tariff to 100%. So that decision is actually made for India. US is basically making that decision for India out of just, I would say, uh, grapes are sour type situation. The hey, because you are not signing the trade deal. Like sometimes what happens is you deal with certain people, and when they realize that they're going to lose, so they act so they give up on themselves, and so that they can say, hey, I just lost interest. I didn't lose, but I lost interest. You see where I'm going with this? So I think that's what Donald Trump's situation is. That he knows that he's not going to get the deal signed. So what he's doing is that he's just basically increasing the tariffs and telling India that, all right, we're not going to have a trade deal. Why? Because of Russian oil. Okay. And there's one more question actually I'm going to answer in this video. And that question is that, so why India is not retaliating to all this tariffs and all these threats that Donald Trump is making? Well, simple answer is that India is retaliating where it is necessary. Where India is retaliating where it hurts the most. Like Pulse, 50% tariffs on the Pulse, US Pulse. But nobody even talked about it. Do you realize this? Nobody talked about it. But India is not doing certain things. For example, just now there's one incident happened, right, where Prime Minister Modi's video was deleted from Instagram, and Facebook apologized and this and that. Lots of people said, "Oh, this should be banned. Account should be banned, and this and that." I'm all for it. Ban it. I mean, it's useless anyways. Facebook basically is uh, it's just a propaganda platform. It takes money from all these separatists, all kinds of organizations, wherever they can get the money from to run the agenda. In fact, when the money for thing was happening, then also there was ad was being run on Facebook that, oh, Christians are being persecuted in India, so please donate. And I'm not making this up, that I'm not telling you this story because I heard it somewhere. I saw it myself. Okay. So these type of things are done by Facebook. But anyway, so why India is not doing that? There's a reason for it. And we'll talk about all that in some other video. Okay. Right now, let's stick to our main thing. Okay. Now, so the core thesis that I'm saying is that India is no longer afraid of American threat because America has pushed the tariff weapons so far that complying with this threat may now be, I would say, strategically more dangerous for India than absorbing the tariff itself. Why? Because at this point, it's the matter of strategic autonomy, preserving the strategic autonomy. Okay. And actually, there are four lines. There is four lines of poetry in Hindi, actually. I wrote these four lines long time ago. जिस तट पर प्यास बुझाने से अपमान देश का होता हो, उस तट पर प्यास बुझाने से प्यासे मर जाना अच्छा है. And this is something, that's the situation here. So strategic autonomy is always linked to the national self-respect. Okay, this is the core of strategic autonomy. All right, that if you want to know how much a country respects itself, how much a country is filled with self-respect, look at how much they care or value their strategic autonomy. Look at Pakistan. What Pakistan does. Do I have to say it? Come on. Do I have to say it? No, I don't have to say it. Look at Iran. Yes, Iran got bombed. Khamenei is dead, this, that. But that country did not bow down to these sanctions and this and that. All these threats that were being made for past 40 some years. That's called strategic autonomy. You do what you do. And yes, I'm not taking side of somebody. Okay, I'm not saying that I'm with Iran or Israel or anything. I am not. All I'm saying is that what you see, you have to respect certain things. Even if somebody is your enemy, if they have certain qualities, you have to respect that. Okay. And that's what happened in case of Iran. You gotta respect that Iran showed the self-respect of not bowing down to anybody for past 40 some years. That's why it matters. Okay. So the why, so all this is right. And coming back to the topic, okay, it just things go into a whole different direction because normally I don't script these things. Okay, now, so the more America weaponizes the tariff against India, then what's going to happen? Because of India's sovereignty, the self respect, the strategic autonomy, this whole thing less useful, actually, less useful this tariff and sanction all these weapons will become. Because eventually, India has more to lose by surrendering than actually bowing down or listening to something. Okay. And this has been the case. History has proven this time and again. Then some of you will be like, what do you mean history has proven? It is proven. I'll tell you simple latest example. Let's talk about Donald Trump, PM Modi. This example right there. In 2018, when Donald Trump became 2016, when he became president, in 2018, he asked Prime Minister Modi to stop buying Iranian oil. That was the case, right? India said, okay, give us 6 months, we will stop buying it, no problem. And India did that. But what happened? Look what happened after that, right? What happened after that? Did it fix the problem? No, it didn't fix the problem. When you actually listen to all this crap and abide by it, then lots of times this whole ordering and all that is just to satisfy your own ego. That hey, we are powerful, we have influence and this and that. But you have to challenge this thing from time to time. India stopped buying Iranian oil, but at the end of it all, what happened? Look, did it solve the problem for anyone? No, it actually made more mess over there, right? And so, what's the guarantee that if India stops buying Russian oil, then also this problem is going to get solved? Or maybe it problem may not actually get solved. In fact, Russians may panic and start nuking Ukraine. Who knows? I mean, they have kept 6,000 nukes, 6,000 plus nukes for a reason, right? It may get worse. So when this whole Russia sanction bill is passed and tariff this and that, those things are, I think that time is long gone where, yeah, let's comply, let's oblige this guy. That time is long gone, especially after what happened after the Op Sindoor, what Donald Trump actually did. Okay. So the number one reason I already explained this thing is that India has survived the maximum tariff threat. So this is one reason, one of the many reasons that India is not going to be afraid of it. Okay. Before confrontation, tariffs were frightening because nobody knew how far United States would go, right? But once the 50% tariff was actually imposed, the uncertainty simply disappeared. And what happened? All the traders, exporters, they immediately scrambled to find the alternatives. And by now, they have already found the alternatives. Most of them have found the alternatives. Others that are still there, they are looking for alternatives. And by December, as soon as India and European Union FTA starts and it starts to get executed, you will see that lots and lots of trade from US will shift to European Union. Okay, and India and European Union trade is supposed to go up to $600 billion, right? And US has already escalated this whole entire thing close to the maximum politically sustainable level. So what's going to happen is that every future tariff threat becomes what? Less psychologically powerful. So the key point is that you fear an unknown weapon more than you have already survived. So the fear of unknown is more powerful than the fear itself. All right. The second reason is that I would say is that America needs India more than its tariffs actually suggest. And see, Western experts always tie this down to what? The alternative to Chinese manufacturing or China. India is one country that can counter China, that can counter China. I don't think that India is there to counter China. Whatever India is doing for its people. And India is not there thinking and wasting time that, oh, we have to counter China. Let's see what China has done. We are going to do exactly that. No, India has its own strategies. India has its own way of doing things. India has its own challenges. India has its own problems. And above all, China has 40-year lead on India. Okay, India just getting started into the export business, or I would say manufacturing, not export, but manufacturing, and it has surpassed 800 some billion dollars. China's export is almost 2 to 3 trillion dollars. That is a big difference, all right, and that is because China had edge 40 years. And that says something. China utilized that time to its advantage. You have to commend that. Wherever you have to commend, you have to comment. I mean, like I said earlier, even it may be your enemy, but this best strategy is always to learn from your enemy. What they are doing, their moves, what they're doing best. You have to learn from them rather than creating a self-isolating yourself like Donald Trump is doing. Okay, so the point that I was getting into is that according to United States, they want companies to reduce dependence on Chinese manufacturing. This is why US was working with India under friendshoring. So the whole idea was that lots of things will be manufactured in India. So instead of buying from China, they're going to import things from India. Now Donald Trump is making it an ego issue. So what's going to happen is that he is going to shoot his own foot again by applying 100% tariff on the products, and then the whole idea of friendshoring will be out of the window too. And that's where the problem is. And India is one of the very few countries with the population, market size, industrial capacity, and geopolitical weight to become what? A major alternative to Chinese manufacturing. There is nobody else that can bring that kind of scale. Why? Because India is used to scale. Okay. India's scalability is India's second nature. And some of you will be like, what do you mean? What am I saying? Scalability is second nature. See, India's population is 1.4 billion. All right. Western population, overall, total Western population, Western countries population combined is almost 900 million. Okay. It's less than the total population of India. That's number one. I'm going to talk, I'll tell you some interesting things. Okay. And then comes your military age population. India has 600 million of that military age population. That's twice the size of the total United States population. So if a country today plans to attack India in some way, I'm just saying hypothetically, then I would say good luck. Now, coming back to manufacturing, how does all this translate into manufacturing and businesses? See, when you apply uh, tariffs on a country like India, where manufacturing, I mean, the military age population is all that, meaning that it's giving the consumption. India is a producer, and all that can be consumed right inside India too. India in itself is a market. That is something that Donald Trump forgets. Donald Trump or United States, the biggest mistake that US is making in this whole process is that they think that US market still matters. Actually, reality is that US market doesn't matter anymore. Why is that? Simply because petrodollar is dead. Okay. There was a time when countries traded with US to get the dollar, because dollar was on the rise, at the top of the game, all that. But after the dawn of the trade in national currencies, the dawn of the trade in local currencies, and the shorter supply chains, this thing has changed, and it is changing rapidly. So this is the biggest mistake that US is making. And another mistake that US is making is that when you remove or try to walk away from a huge market like India's market, then you are actually cutting off that dollar recycling as well. You have to understand this. This is why I always say that Donald Trump may be thinking lots of things, but sanction is one of the things that he's not thinking. Why? Because uh, simply because India's market is so massive that if they even think about sanctions the way they have applied sanctions on Russia or some other countries, it's only going to backfire them. Why? Because India will simply get rid of all the companies that are there, the American companies, and they will find the alternatives immediately. Market will be open for somebody else. But that will have a serious impact on US companies, right? So so this is why I said that America needs India more than the tariff actually suggests. And so for alternative to Chinese manufacturing, I would say that India is already working on lots of things. One of the things is that semiconductor ecosystem. Like China has semiconductor ecosystem, but semiconductor ecosystem India has to build that because India needs it, not because world needs it or something. Yes, world has a need and all that, but India realizes that if India has to be self-reliant in the fourth industrial revolution, then you have to be self-reliant in semiconductors and chip making. And and I think that one of the things that India needs to really focus on from the get-go is the GPU manufacturing, GPU building, and CPU building, CPU chips. CPU chips and GPU chips, those are the two things that actually Indian companies, or if there are startups, they need to start focusing on that. Why? Because India does not have its own GPU based hyperscaler. GPU based hyperscaler meaning that, like, Google Cloud or say AWS, they all have their own GPU based hyperscaler, but India does not have its own, the Indian company that runs the GPU based hyperscaler. And even if they did, it will be from Nvidia or ATI or somebody else. Give take. Two major companies are Nvidia and ATI. Or AMD, you can say AMD is for CPU, ATI is Radeon, is basically for GPU. So that is still is a bottleneck, right? So that's this these are some of the reasons that India does not respond to these type of threats the way lots of people actually expect India to respond. Okay, then the third reason, let's talk about the third reason. But before we move into third reason, actually, so let me wrap up the second reason, that what I was going to say. The key contradiction or the key point in this whole entire thing was that America wants India to replace China while making Indian exports less competitive. And this is why I say that whatever Donald Trump at this point is doing, it's all ego driven. It has very little to do with the business tactics. Okay. And that tactics is just not going to work, and it's not working. Okay. And the third reason is that India has more economic escape routes. Okay. When Donald Trump actually announced the threat or the tariff for the first time, when he included India into all that, then that's when actually the whole backup plan started. If you notice that India went into on this whole free trade agreement signing spree all over the place. And I have explained this thing in my past videos regarding free trade agreements and all that why India went on this spree with ASEAN and then Australia, New Zealand, United Kingdom, European Union, the mother of all deals, and this and that. All that has been signed with GCC countries, with UAE, right, with Israel, and all that. And now India is actually expanding its footprint in Africa too. And the what was the starting point? Ethiopia, Egypt, Somaliland is there too in the scene. Then you have Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa. These are the countries where India is expanding its footprint. Okay, so so Indian exporters have started to find the alternatives already. So more and more these type of threats are made, more less effective it will become. Why? Because it can redirect the whole entire export, attract manufacturing for its. They can do all that for domestic market and deepen commercial relationship beyond the United States, right? So, and then best advantage that India has its is internal consumer economy, and this gives India more insulation than export dependent states, right? Because if you are manufacturing something and you cannot export, why you cannot export? Why? Because you have low domestic consumption, but India has very high domestic consumption. So so because of all this, lots of things get consumed in India, and then after that they are exported. So the damage with this type of tariff and all that is very little. And I think Donald Trump is still comparing India and China vis-a-vis like that, apples to apples. That's what he thinks it is. And he thinks that the way US gave China all the things, and China became a giant and this and that. What he doesn't realize is that China has been putting restrictions on its own economy, on its own people. That's why China controlled the imports as well. You have to understand this. Okay. India's governance is different from Chinese governance. China can put restrictions on the imports as to what people can consume even. China can actually put restrictions on people how much gasoline they should be using in a day. Lots of restrictions are there. You go look into it. Then they do it. And that's how they always control their imports. So their overall trade was always in surplus. It was always positive. Okay. But in case of India, you cannot go and tell people that, hey, don't buy this, don't do that, don't eat this, don't eat that, don't use gasoline, don't use diesel, all that mumbo jumbo. Why? Because India is a democratic country. That system works totally differently. Let's just say that, right? So, so for India to do things, it takes time. But the way India's population is, the way things are, I think India can consume on its own and then export, and India can manage all that. And that's what India is doing. Okay. So all in all, in the end, what India has realized, especially Prime Minister Modi has realized, that tariff can hurt India temporarily, not permanently, but they cannot control India. That's the thing. Okay. And sanction is something that US just cannot apply sanctions on India, even though they tried to apply the sanctions on Chabahar port actually. But Chabahar port was, I made a video on it long, but I had to take it down because of YouTube was just doing its own YouTube thing. Okay, because there was Iran and all that. You put Iran keyword or all that, I think that they start to censor all that stuff. So even if video is not about war, so YouTube is basically a bunch of crybabies. They just cry all the time. Anyways, so so tariff can hurt India, but they cannot control India, right? India may compromise on commercial issues such as import duties and market access and purchasing commitments and all that, right? But energy security, Russia, Iran, defense policy, strategic autonomy, all that belong to a whole different category. if it is simple commercial stuff, India can manage. But when it comes to national security, then strategic autonomy, that's whole different ball game. Then that's one aspect that India, I don't think, will ever compromise on. And India has seen this thing that obliging Donald Trump doesn't get you anywhere. It doesn't get you any extra points as such. Okay, India start buying Iranian oil. What did it do? It's again back to what? 100% tariff threat. Now he's saying that don't buy Russian oil. I mean, India started purchasing Iranian oil, so Strait of Hormuz got blocked. Now, when you stop buying Russian oil, so Russians are going to nuke everyone. So that's his mindset. Okay, but that's because, see, I am just saying all these things as a joking way, but the reality is this: that this was United States' plan all along. They thought that they're going to slowly and slowly pull India away from Russia, and sooner or later they may be able to successfully do this. And I think there is a reason for it. Why US diplomats, they thought that it's possible. I think that's because uh, Indian diplomats, they talk and they say things that American diplomats want to hear. So when American diplomats say, "Yeah, you got to move away from Russia, man," so Indian diplomats will say, "Yeah, yeah, we understand, we understand." But the reality is that when Indian guy is speaking English and saying, "Yeah, I understand," it doesn't mean that they really understand. I understand, they use "I understand" as a filler. So but in American diplomats' mind, they are thinking that probably that uh, that yeah, they are complying, they're going to walk away from Russia. Yes, we're gonna be successful. And turns out nothing is happening. And lots of time these diplomats are very smart. So at that point in time, they will say yes, yes, yeah, you're right, you are the man, this, that. Indian diplomats, I mean. They will be yes man. Very nicely. Listen to you, give you all the power so that you can brag about yourself. But when push comes to shove, then Indian diplomats, they show their true color, that they are not somebody to be trifled with. You cannot just mess around with them, and you cannot mess with them overall, anyways. And this is what I think US is finding out the hard way. That at first Joe Biden found out that it's not going to happen. In fact, I think that Joe Biden's administration was very desperate, actually. They were so desperate that that's when I knew that Quad is gone. That's not going to happen. Why? Because of the desperation. They were using the Quad thinking that India will move away from Russia. So the Quad and few other groupings were created so that, when you meet at the leader level in these groupings, so you discuss from time to time. Hey, when are you going to move away from Russia? When are you going to move away from Russia? Like that. They put their pressure on you. But anyways, that's not gonna happen. Okay? Because there's a lot there is a lot to lose than India gains. Okay. So long story short is that India will negotiate over trade, but it will not trade away its sovereignty. Okay. And in the end, I think I dragged it a little too much, that India is not immune to American tariffs. Nobody is, because tariff is tariffs. That's it, right? You cannot be immune to it. What you can be is that you can simply discover that paying the tariff may sometimes be cheaper than obeying America. That's the whole thing. Sometimes you have to remind a bully that you're not so much of a bully. That's what Iran is doing right now. Okay. So this is it for this video, guys. Please do like and subscribe, and I will talk to you guys in another video. Take care.